governments and platforms? And when harm occurs, where should accountability ultimately sit if we want AI governance to be seen as a legitimate governance by the people who are most affected by it?
Thank you so much. Is this working? Yes. Thank you very much for that I see we're starting with the easy questions here. Since this is my first event, let me also very warmly thank the Government of India for hosting such an already vibrant and exciting summit, and also thank CEW very much for the fantastic partnership, not just on this event, but on many areas over the last few years on this critical topic. So coming to accountability, I mean, it is one of the features of conversations on this that sometimes, you know, something bad happens and we're not quite sure who to blame, and something good happens and we're not really quite sure who to thank, and therefore how to do it again. So the fact that accountability is so diffuse across the system really can have one of two, you know, can I think have two different consequences. It can be the basis for a flexible, vibrant, appropriate way of thinking about AI, which can adapt easily to the pace of this fast-moving technology. It can also, of course, be a recipe for nobody taking responsibility and never knowing how to fix things when they go wrong. And which one it is going to depends very largely on decisions that are made in places like this, in governments, in companies, and I think we don't know yet which way the pendulum is going to swing. I think also, you know, we hear often that AI is a transformational technology like the steam engine, like electricity, like many of these things. It has also a unique feature in the extent to which the technology, the innovations, the diffusion of these technologies are being driven by private sector activity rather than by the actions of government. In many previous eras of technology, it was state investments and, in some cases, enterprises which were leading the rollout, and therefore lines of accountability were much more straightforward because we can see lines of accountability between states and citizens. This is a challenge, not just AI presents us, therefore, not just with a technological challenge, but also with a governance challenge. We are in a slightly new era at every level, at the level of global governance, national and even local governments, how to line up these various different players to make sure that accountability sits where it needs to sit, that people can get redress when bad things happen, but without stifling the innovation that has brought us to where we are. So, I mean, I don't have a definitive recipe, alas, but a few pointers. I think companies need to be accountable for what they do, and that accountability needs to reside outside the companies themselves. We cannot have a situation where the behavior of companies and the impact of companies is monitored and governed by bodies which are set up by those companies themselves. There are arguments that are made endlessly as to why this is necessary, but it never works. We know that time and time again. We should not let that happen. But that said, I think, you know, these are the companies which are creating this new technology and which know it best, so they need to be involved in some way. I think coming right down to the other end of the chain, we also need to get much better at driving accountability from users. I think we often get slightly bedazzled by new technologies, and we sort of think that this is all much too complicated for us and we have to leave this to someone else. I think it's absolutely critical that people have the confidence to demand that accountability themselves. And we cannot, as citizens, be endlessly passing the job onto somebody else. So the final point is, who is it who needs to sit between those companies of whom accountability must be demanded and those citizens who ultimately need to be the ones where accountability ends, well, it is governments and the public sector. And I think there is, we like to think that perhaps this is a new technology and there have to be some new answers and new things. In the end, I don't think we have any substitute for governments understanding what it is that people want, which is not always a simple thing, and then doing their very best to deliver it. That has been the basis for democratic governments for centuries now. It's a formula that works, and it's a formula that we need to apply in this new context. I'm very aware that doing that is going to be much harder than it looks, but I'm hoping that the other panelists will be able to provide some answers on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'll now shift to Mr. Kant. Under your leadership, India's G20 placed the Global South at the center of global economic conversations. This is now the first major AI summit hosted in the Global South. From your vantage point, how do you think that AI can be deployed as a genuine growth engine for countries of the Global South, including for challenges like climate action, without reproducing the same concentration of power and value that earlier waves of technology did?
So first of all, make no mistake that this is a hugely transformational technology. It's going to cut across every sector. It's going to disrupt every single way of life. And therefore, it's very, very important that AI is made accessible, it's made affordable, and it's made accountable. Also, AI must be multilingual. Important thing is that today, the way AI is evolving, it's putting in a huge amount of investment. Vast sums are being invested. It's leading to a huge amount of disruption, but it'll end up creating a highly unequal society. The challenge is whether we can ensure that AI reaches those below poverty line, vast segments of population, whether AI can be used to transform lives of citizens in the global south, and whether AI can be used to improve learning outcomes, health outcomes, improve nutritional standards, which are major challenges before the world. Important thing is that today, we in India, if you look at OpenAI, ChatGPT, we are providing more data than the United States of America, 33% more data than what the United States of America is doing. These large language models are getting better and better and better on the basis of data from the global south. So the models are getting refined on data for the global south. They will create business models and sell you products at very high cost tomorrow. And therefore, it's important that when India builds up, or the global south builds up its models, they are made better on their own data. That's number one. Number two, it's important that we've learned from our own digital public infrastructure, which enabled India to leapfrog in 7 years. What the Bank of International Settlement said, India achieved 50 years of progress in 7 years. Why did it? How could it do it? Because it was done because it was open source, it was open API, and it was globally interoperable. And therefore, today, we do fast payment, we do stock market transaction, we do insurance, we do credit to the last mile on the basis of this open source, because we created the digital public infrastructure layer. But on top of that, we allowed private sector to innovate and compete in the market space. And therefore, my view is that there has to be a layer of digital public identity in AI on top of which we should allow private sector to open and compete. But more important than that is that as we go ahead, it's important that we use AI to transform lives of citizens in global south. if we end up creating an unequal society, which is, I mean, if you look at the United States, it's not that the United States is not progress. In the post-World War II era, if there's one country which has progressed and grown, it's the United States. It accounts for 27% of the global GDP, 50% of the market cap, with just 4% of the population. But it didn't build up a safety net. And because it didn't build up a safety net, you have an unequal society. And therefore, it's important that as we progress, as we grow, we use the power of this technology really to transform lives of citizens in the global south and ensure that this technology is used. If it is not multilingual, it will cut out a large section of the population. If it is not used to the benefits of below poverty line, people below the poverty line will remain poor forever. If you are not able to use it for improving education, which is the key to improve learning outcomes, and what was physically not possible is today possible because of the power of AI. The power of data enables you, the power of machine learning enables you to achieve quantum jumps and to achieve technologically pole vaulting because of the power of this technology in learning outcomes and health outcomes and nutritional, stunting, wasting. All these are key challenges of the global south. And to my mind, that is really the key. How do we use this technology to transform lives of citizens and the next billion people of you?
Thank you so much for so emphatically laying down the contours of how AI should be looking at creating impact, which is why we are here. I will now shift to Dr. Ghosh. AI is increasingly being framed as a tool for climate action, but at the same time, it comes with its own energy, water, and resource costs. So, how should young countries navigate these trade offs and pursue AI development without undermining climate action as well?
Thanks, Ruchira, and good morning to everyone. On behalf of CW, let me also extend my warm welcome to all of you and thank Claire and the UN Foundation for the partnership we've had for many years. And also thanks to the eminent panelists here. We're particularly privileged and excited to have you here joining our conversation. Ruchira, I see this as a double helix. There's a digital revolution going on and a decarbonization revolution going on at different speeds, with different momentums in different geographies. But the two have to come together. These can't be parallel tracks. These have to come together. When they come together properly, then AI becomes one more general purpose technology to impact another general purpose technology, which in my opinion is climate action. Climate action is not one sectoral vertical, but something that can impact all sectors of your economy, improve productivity, increase resilience, and deliver better jobs growth and sustainability. AI can do that by, for instance, optimizing for how we use the solar radiation or the wind for better integration of renewables in the grid. It can do that by better flood forecasting to save lives and livelihoods. It can do that, as we'll talk about in a session a little later in the morning that we're organizing with Google, on how it increases agricultural resilience and so forth. But equally, there's a duality. The data centers are significantly contingent on power demand, on water demand, on cooling demand, and you need to then develop this infrastructure that is ready for the future, not just leveraging the present. That means you need to factor in the water that will be needed in perpetuity, the energy that will be needed, the land that will be needed for scaling up, the connectivity that will be needed. Now, as Mr. Kant was saying, right now we are potentially facing a risk that an unequal approach towards this means that the global south becomes the geography from which data is extracted, but is not extracting in return the value that we could get. How do we flip this script? How do we make sure that the global south is not just raising its hand saying we would like a seat at the table, but is able to leverage its capabilities? There is increasingly, the Stanford University has found India, Singapore, the UAE are among the top 10 Brazil, South Africa, and others are in the top 20 in what they call the AI Vibrancy Index. So this is not, this desire to have a seat at the table is not a call for, altruism and charity. It is a demand based on capabilities that we already have and that we'd like to leverage. So how do we then square these two circles? On one hand, the need for decarbonization, and on the other hand, extracting value through the digital and the AI revolution. I would say, number one, we should reject, at least at a narrative and first principles level, this false binary that either you have climate action or you have an AI-driven ambition. Secondly, we've got to have intentionality in embedding environmental sustainability in our AI strategies, transparently measuring the energy, the water, and the life cycle footprints, incentivizing local, energy-efficient AI applications, collaborating to build the capacity and infrastructure in the geographies where it makes the most optimal sense. And thirdly, then, insist on equity in global AI governance. This is what Claire was also referring to. At the end of the day, while we could say this time is different, in some ways it is not. Technologies have always disrupted human society. This technology will also disrupt human society. How society then adapts to it depends on the intentionality of the guardrails that we put in it. 3,700 years ago, Hammurabi wrote his code, and we all celebrate this. But the Hammurabi code was not just written by Hammurabi. It was actually deriving from pre-existing traditions, legal traditions, customs, etc., that existed in the civilizations of the time. So the code that we write today is not just the AI code, but the guardrails code that we write must draw from the legal traditions that exist across the world. That diversity must illuminate and inject new energy in a more equal, inclusive approach towards these two revolutions on decarbonization and digitalization. Thank you.
Nudging us back into not falling into binaries and false binaries. I will now hand over to Selma to take this conversation further.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. This is Salama with a global fellow for UNF. So I will start my question from Ambassador Philip. So many African countries want to leverage AI development, but lack of infrastructure, data ecosystem, and capital has hindered this experience. So from Kenya's experience, what should be a country's priority to avoid being dependent on external AI ecosystem?
Thank you so much, Selma, for the question. And again, for the Indian government, but also the Center and UNF for convening this meeting. I think a couple of things. One, I think, of course, is that there's, and I always say it's a conceptual framing, right? So AI is not necessarily new. AI is 50 plus years old. But I think it's the current version of it that some of us in Africa are a little bit curious about. If you look at the opportunity, and I think my fellow panelists have mentioned it, that AI has potential for growth and transformation. But the first thing we always say is in Africa is we have to do the unfinished business. We still have to invest in connectivity. We are still the lowest connected continent in the world. We still have to invest in energy. We still do not, about 600 million Africans are not connected to the grid. And so as much as we have this aspiration on artificial intelligence, I think we need to do what we need to do. And that's largely falls squarely on governments like ours. But that is where also AI becomes interesting because it can actually accelerate a lot of these things, whether you are provisioning for energy or connecting unconnected populations, and that's some of the use cases we are working on. Secondly, Africa is not one country, it's not homogeneous, it's 54 countries, and so I think our understanding is that each country must do their heavy lift. What we believe is that, yes, talk about sovereignty, but it has to be sovereignty in an era of interdependence, right? So countries still need to do what they need to do in terms of what they think is sovereign. You do not have to invest in everything, and I think that's where we see there's a problem. Everybody wants to invest in data centers. We can't. Currently, only 1% of global data centers are in Africa, 50% are in South Africa. It just means some countries will not be able to do this. But then it calls upon collaboration and sharing, and that is why I think working with the Mandeep and the team around the United Nations, it becomes interesting that global cooperation, and especially regional cooperation, but also South-South cooperation becomes important, where we have to kind of see where there's shared value and we can collaborate and not necessarily spend money on doing anything. So where do we start? We believe in the African continent we have enough talent to do this. We are still the youngest population in the world, median age of 19.7. We have 1.2 million Nigerians, for example, contributing it to GitHub for free, 300,000 Kenyans doing it, and I'm sure I can extrapolate, including Ethiopia. And so it means if we have the talent, then what is missing? And I think it was mentioned here, issues around access to the factories of artificial intelligence. I think we still need differentiated pricing models around accessing AI models, right? So today, Kenya is the largest user of ChatGPT, Kenya, at $20. You can imagine. So I have my colleagues paying $20 to access models. And you can imagine what $20 means to India and Kenya. It's expensive, but they're still paying for it. So I think we need a conversation around access, but it's access and excellence. We just don't know how to access cheap things. We need to access at the same level that folks are accessing. Second thing is use cases. You're accessing it for what? I do not want to use ChatGPT to find the next Starbucks. So we need to figure out how to ensure that our young people are actually using AI for things that are of meaning, health, education, things that are outcomes. So the more we sort of enable folks to use these use cases, is the better. The third part, of course, is scaling the infrastructure. And I agree, we may not necessarily have all the data centers, but we can scale infrastructure to the extent that it delivers outcomes. And this is why I have a sense we have collaboration. And we must invest in the entire stack, right? So invest in data, invest in compute, invest in talent, invest in use cases, but also invest in trust. And for me, trust is where the governance part is. So there's not a one-size-fits-all in my view, but I think where we can collaborate is where we have use cases, and use cases enable us to actually collaborate better. Because I do not think anybody here talks about, I'm going to use AI in the morning, or there's somebody who does that. Can I check the room? Right? You don't, right? So you take an Uber, you're using AI. You use your email, you're using AI, right? So I think it's to the extent of getting folks to understand that if we do the right investments and do the unfinished business, and then just leverage of this technology in the everyday use that you do, then it becomes interesting. And finally, and this is where I spend a lot of time, it's leadership. And it all boils down to leadership, and not technology leadership. The techies are fine, but it's people like us who need to understand it. It's the ministers of finance, it's the minister of planning, it's the ministers of science, it's the ministers of research. We need to invest in AI fluency so that the leadership understands that this next general purpose technology and its potential influence must deliver for every sector and not just the technology sector.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Philip, for actually mentioning about access, regional collaboration, more than the regional collaboration, but also South-South collaboration and leadership. So I will go to His Excellency Amandeb for the next question. You have seen this system from both sides, as a career bureaucrat and now as a shaper of global AI governance. How should young countries like India and other countries resolve the tension between regulation and innovation without freezing delivery? Also, aligned with that question, why do global systems still struggle to hold speed, legitimacy, and accountability together when it comes to technology?
Thank you very much, Salma, and thank you for the organizers for this invitation. Great to be with the esteemed panelists this morning. Now, the real tension is not between regulation and innovation. The real tension in my mind is between the haves and the have-nots in terms of the AI opportunity. So Arunabha was talking about another false binary. So this is a false binary between regulation and innovation. In fact, the right guardrails can help advance innovation. Now, let's reflect for a moment, because we are in this discussion today with young people. So we have this moment where AI is growing its capacities, its power, its adoption is diffusing. And at the same time, you have the next billion, in a sense, coming of age and ready to shape the world. So we have to ensure that, just like we spoke of those that twin transition, decarbonization and digitalization. So this demographic transition and the AI transition, they work together. So that's the big context for me. At the end of the day, all technologies that have shaped societies through these waves of industrial revolutions or waves of general purpose technologies, they are about power. So how that power diffuses, who holds that power, what's that power used for. So again, useful to keep that in mind. Now, your question about how can young countries like Kenya, like South Africa, Phil mentioned the median age in Africa. The median age in India is higher, but not that high. So how can they resolve this tension without freezing delivery? So let's remember that the AI that we're dealing with is not a traditional product. You cannot have a static governance of it, that you get a one-time code, an OTP, and then you punch it in, and there you are. These systems learn, they adapt to context, the users, the interaction between the system and the users, that also shifts over time. So we have to be dynamic and agile in terms of our governance approaches. So higher impact use cases that will have consequences like life and death decisions, or systems that are hooked up to financial markets, they would require higher oversight, mandatory testing for flaws and vulnerabilities, clear accountability, human oversight. Whereas, other use cases with low risk, experimentation should be the default setting. So this is the way to avoid stifling innovation while protecting people. And Sri Amitabh Kanji spoke of this very important idea of having a safety net. In countries like India and Kenya, it's very important to have that approach. The second point is there was a reference earlier to digital public infrastructure. So with AI also, we should build shared rails, and we should not regulate in silos. So this means interoperability, open standards, and this is the way to dramatically lower costs and accelerate diffusion without limiting innovation. And the third point, and this is very important, and Phil hinted at that, and that's investment in capacity to govern, capacity to adopt AI in context. So it's not only about codes and laws and committees and so on, it's about the capacity to absorb AI, to govern AI, because unequal capacity would lead to unequal outcomes and greater inequality. Now, I want to close by speaking a little bit about what is happening at the UN. There is a three-pillared approach, three-pronged approach built around the science of AI, the policy side, the governance side, and the capacity issue. So across science, policy, and capacity, we are moving with a strategic mindset following the decisions taken by member states at the Global Digital Compact. And we are also informed by history. The world has tackled electricity, nuclear energy, civil aviation, the early internet, and where we've seen innovation outpace governance. So we are bringing in a bit of, let's say, agility, a bit of foresight to the looming AI governance challenges, particularly through the science panel, which for Arunabha would recall the IPCC approach, but more iterative, done by a smaller group of interdisciplinary experts who were approved by the General Assembly last week. So on the dialogue, it's very important that this summit is a very, very important moment, first time in the Global South. Now, this summit will help us transition to an inclusive dialogue in July, where all 193 countries have a seat at the table, and in a stable manner. So it's a regular dialogue. Everyone comes together regularly to share experiences, lessons learned, best practices, what to do, what to avoid. Because without this coordination, without this cooperation, adoption costs will stay high and accountability gaps can widen. So this is why I think the questions around speed, legitimacy, and accountability lead us to the inclusive settings that are being put together. Now, I'll conclude by saying that AI governance that lasts will be shaped by those who are going to be the most affected by AI, which means this younger generation. So without this intergenerational design, intergenerational approach, we are not going to be able to shape an empowering AI future. If today's inequalities continue into that era and we end up with a K-shaped economy, more of a K-shaped economy, more of a K-shaped society, then we would have failed. So young people should not be passengers in this story. They should be actively shaping the outcome so that we can bend these two legs of the K and build a more equal world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, for the answer. I wanted to echo the point that was mentioned regarding capacity and outcome. Unequal capacity will lead to unequal outcome, so we need to work on the capacity aspect as well. So lastly, I will go to Safia. So we have talked about AI governance for so long, so let's talk about what it means when we say responsible AI. So as AI scales across sectors, millions of people in young countries will encounter it not as a user, but as a worker inside its supply chain. From your perspective and experience working with communities and workers, what does responsible AI looks like from the perspective of those workers?
Thank you so much, Samawit, for that question. I'm very happy to see that we're bringing the conversation back to the workforce. And I also want to really thank CEW and UNF for this excellent panel. So I think there's a few words that my panelists have shared here today that really brings to the core of this question. Those words are accountability, being multilingual, excellence, and fundamentally trust. And I think one of the things where I want to start is by reframing how we actually think about those that are currently at the bottom of the AI pyramid, those who are in the invisible aspect of the AI value chain. And that is often the workers. In fact, the global south, but India and specifically India, Kenya, Uganda, and the Philippines are the 4 countries that have some of the most amount of AI workers than anywhere else in the world. These are the workforces that are actually building, annotating, and evaluating the models that we have today. And it's within this value chain that we actually need to make improvements and changes so that we can actually see AI becoming a power for actually upliftment and catalyzing everyone rather than just, unfortunately, what I feel it is right now centered on those who speak English and those who are in the global north. So I think when we think about the value chain, I actually want to talk about 4 aspects. First, you have the aspect of labor. How is the labor actually defined? How are those workers treated? What is their contribution and how is that contribution valued? Do we pay fair wages to those people that are a part of our digital economy? Are we allowing them to engage in fundamentally safe work? Because I'm sure, as a lot of you know, a lot of the work that happens around AI is around moderation, and that is a very psychologically difficult task. If it is that task, do we have the right guardrails in place? Do we have more than just saying, I will give you a little bit of money if you want to go to a therapist? Do we have real support? Do we have dignity, right? I think this is something we often forget about in the workplace, especially when we talk about the informal sector. But I think we need to bring all of the positive tenets that we have from white-collar jobs to this informal or currently informal economy to say, what does dignity actually mean in the workplace? What does it mean to show up for work, to annotate the models that we are using every day and come out of that day with something more than just a check? And finally, how can we ensure that there is actually knowledge in this value chain? It is extractive if we're only thinking about our youth and our workers as simply workers. We need to actually empower them with knowledge and skills about AI so that they are able to do more with what they have learned, so that they're able to actually progress and move out of the value chain or move up the value chain. So I think labor is one of the most important foundations. Second to labor is about data, right? Is the data that we are building our models on actually inclusive? And is it taking into account the lived realities of so many of the people that we have in the world? I mean, even though a lot of the data workers that we have are in India, are in Kenya, they are being forced to do work that is very centered, right, on an English-speaking world. They are not actually contributing their own knowledge and lived realities. And to Amitabh sir's point, if we actually want to have a AI system that is inclusive, we have to have, at the data level, data sets that are multilingual, that are contextual, and that are culturally grounded. Because otherwise, at best, you'll just have a very fancy system that can maybe speak your language, but probably wrong. And then, of course, we need to build models intentionally. I know vibe coding is a big thing that we all think about today, but that is not how you create an AI world that is fundamentally more inclusive. Every aspect of model building needs to be intentional. And then finally, we cannot stop at building. We need to think about evaluations and who evaluates. It is not simply enough to have a doctor evaluate the veracity of a medical chatbot. We also need to understand if the ASHA worker is able to interact with that bot in Bhojpuri, in her local language. We need to make sure that everyone is able to understand the language and the outputs that are there, not simply because they are technically correct. So I think if we really want to create an AI future that works for everyone, we need to create this feedback loop from labor to data to models to evaluation, and make sure that everyone in our community, not just those who are at the top of the value chain, are actually having a voice to discuss. We need to make sure that fundamentally this isn't extractive. And I think at Karya, which is the organization that I run, this is something we've been trying to do a lot. And I think I'll close with just giving an example of what can happen if you decide to actually center communities. So over the past 2 years, we've actually been working with the support of the Gates Foundation to engage 20,000 women across 6 different language communities in India to answer the question, what does it take to tag and flag gender bias in your languages? And we started from a very fundamental point, an understanding that gender bias as a word is something that is English, and we actually don't have ways to define this as is in any of our Indian languages. And so we had to start with actions of collective community engagement to actually build those definitions with those women. We then were able to take that to actually build a framework to flag and tag gender bias that specifically speaks to the types of gender bias that we see in our languages today. And what I think is a very interesting way of showing this is that most gender bias, you know, when you speak about in English languages, it's around profession, it's around occupation. But when we worked with these 20,000 women, what we learned is that for them, it was actually a lot more about community, about personality, about emotions. And while this is a slight difference, it is a critical difference because it means that without addressing this, we are building models that aren't addressing the core lived experiences of people on the ground. So I think I just want to close by saying we need to really think about how do we think about ownership differently and creating ownership across that value chain so that we don't actually leave behind those that are probably our most important builders, right? How do we actually make AI work for everyone? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will now hand over to Kunalika for some question and answer segment. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our speakers for helping us stay on time. We do have time to maybe take 2 to 3 questions. I'll be taking them collectively. So please, if you could raise your hand. Okay, do we have mics to go around? Yeah, okay. Maybe 2 questions from there and 2 questions from the other side. If you could introduce yourself with just your name, your question, and if it's addressed to a specific panelist, then their name also.
Yeah, it's Dinesh Gupta. My question is to be, AI is being destructive to become a constructive to the young one.
Thank you.
Hello, sir, and good evening. Good morning, everyone. Sorry. My name is Rupesh, and question is: we already have crypto, we already have dark web, and now we have AI. So, how we are going to deal with cybercrime, especially in multinational level?
If you could give it to her. Input.
Hi, I'm Yogini. I have a question for Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Ghosh, what are the green technologies or what are the decarbonization technologies you see becoming more and more prominent and important, especially for the global south, as all the energy requirements and water usage requirements also sort of start appearing in perpetuity?
One final question right there at the end, and then we'll go to the speakers.
Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. I'm Stuti Srivastav, and my question towards the panel is India has a vast diversity, and we have a very glorious past. So, I would like to ask the panelists that how can we integrate this process? Like, how can we use it for the Indic Renaissance? How can we use AI in the process? Thank you.
Just one. 10 seconds.
Thank you. I'm Vandana. I work with senior citizens, and with the growing, life expectancy, we are going to have a very big cohort, which is older. They have a lot of value to add, but we are viewing them as a non-productive sector, in terms of how they can contribute to the AI revolution. So I just wanted to ask the panel if there is any intervention that is happening in this area.
Right. Thank you very much. We'll close the questions here. Move over to the panel. I'll allow 1 minute perhaps to everyone, starting with Shri Amitabh Kant and then.
Well, let me start with the question that the very young lady, Vandana, asked about senior citizens. I'm a senior citizen myself. I'm nearing 70. I got onto Claude, and I started learning coding myself. And Claude has become a way of life for me. Every single speech that I prepare, I give my talking points and I get them refined. Every intervention that I make, my daily preparations of what I need to do for the day, it's all done using Claude today. So I've done it at my age of 70 today. So my suggestion is that it'll, in terms of improving your health, improving what I want to do for exercise, what I want to eat, everything can be done using the power of AI. So it's very important that people like you really, to the senior citizens, help them, teach them. This power of AI can really improve the quality of life of these citizens. To the young lady there about civilization, and she has a very important point, because if we do not use the power of our own data, if we don't use our own history, our own civilization, it'll be neo-colonization in reverse. We'll again become colonized on the basis of model. I mean, we should understand what's happening in the world. We are talking about 50, 60,000 latest GPUs to drive India AI mission. The OpenAI deal with NVIDIA is for 11 gigawatt of power. That is close to about 5 million GPUs driving that. So look at the power, computing power which is being used there. But what is important is that can we use sophisticated software where India excels and limited computing power with much better software to excel. And it's important to understand that the winner in a technology race is never the first person who breaks it. You look at the history of technology. Clive Osborne did the first laptop, but the battle for laptop was not won by Clive Osborne. It was won by Apple. Alta Vista did the first internet. Alta Vista went bust, but it was Google which won the race. So my view is that India has the data, India has the talent. Without the talent, there can't be AI. Without the data, you can't refine models. And therefore, India must use its data, its talent, and spread out computing power to its citizens so that we can benefit from this power. This is a transformational technology, make no mistake. It'll transform the lives of citizens. It'll transform India. And therefore, we must use the power of our own talent and our own data to use our own history, our own civilization. We're building 10 large language models. We are opening up our data through our AI Kosh. We are providing computing power to our startups and to our researchers at much lower cost. And I think what we should do is really build the guardrail, do what we've done. We should be DPI, digital public infrastructure for AI, and create an alternative model for the rest of the world.
Thank you. Lots of very tempting questions there, but in the interest of time, let me just come back to the first question that also referred to crypto and the dark web. I mean, I think I'm not going to address any specific points about crypto, but I think, you know, one of the challenges that we're facing today is not just any individual technology, be that AI or anything else, but the way in which they intersect and build on each other. And if we look, for example, at what happened a few weeks ago with the changes to Grok and the sort of new facilities that were, you know, the new capabilities that were added to Grok that allowed all kinds of abuse to go on, part of the reason why that was so destructive is because of the intersection there between the AI tool and the social media platforms on which that tool was diffused. So I think, you know, one of the things to look for here is not just any single technology, but the way in which these different technologies intersect and the specific challenges that poses.
I'll just pick up that question about children. I think 1/3 of the data is being generated today by children. And you have unique challenges with AI shaping play, learning, and social interactions, all three. And the unique challenge that's foremost for us at the UN is how do you translate the international norms, the CRC, for example, the Child Rights Convention, into practical guidance, design considerations, and accountability. So I think this has to be a key focus, and I'm very happy that India has prioritized this theme for this summit. You know, we'll have a discussion, longer discussion on this on 20th. But I think when we look at the elderly, that's of course, and women and young girls, but we also need to keep this demographic in mind because the potential for empowerment is huge, but also the potential for harm is stupendous. We already see some early signs of harm, some tragedies, and we need to make sure that young people are not forced down a slope of cognitive decline, further distraction, issues around not just safety and protection of rights, but well-being. Thank you. And thank you to the Foundation and the Council for bringing us together.
A quick one on the environment. So for the first time ever, there's a UN resolution that we sort of pushed through the UN in December on environmental sustainability of artificial intelligence systems. So I think it would be useful for you to coordinate with us and the United Nations Environmental Program, because we are doing for the first time a stock take, a global stock take on technologies that are, you know, that are sort of energy efficient, but also we are also coming up with standards and evaluation mechanisms for data centers, water, cooling. So I think it's the first year. Hopefully by December we'll have something, but it's a collaborative effort. Hopefully you can connect with us.
I think I'll just close with saying something very quick on the point around AI and youth. I think we need to realize that this is the time where youth can be both sides of the coin. They can not only be the most excellent builders of the AI models that we have and the data sets that we use, but they can also be the ones that can reap the most benefit. So I think it's really important to open up the conversation and in fact not just have them in rooms like this, not just have them at the higher levels, but have them within South-South collaboration, have them within countries, across countries, so that we don't continue to build without their foresight in mind.
Thank you so much. Before we move to the final question, I would also like to thank the USG for his time today. I know he has to leave a little early. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll hand over to Vishal now for the final segment.
Thank you, Pranalika. I'll be quick. I think I just want to pick up on the question ma'am asked about sustainability of data centers. So my question to you, Arnaba, is how do you understand the frugal AI framing that the economic survey and this summit itself also is focusing on? Do you think it's a reaction to like resource constraints that global South countries are operating in, or is it like a sustainability framing that we should be looking towards? Thank you.
I think the answer is the latter. All countries operate under resource constraints. The question is whether you are intentional about recognizing them or not. I think what my interpretation of frugal AI is it's optimal AI. It's optimized for resources, optimized for use cases, optimized for places, optimized for choke points. Only then you will get a model that's actually fit for purpose. And to your question, Yogini, we've in our report, we've looked at different cooling technologies. Air-cooled technologies use less water but more energy. Water-based technologies use more water but less energy, etc. We have to solve for this, and that's why CW and Systemic have put together a report on scaling India's data center ecosystem, and I request all the panelists just to hold this up as we release this report.